Hello, and welcome back. My name's Jose, and today we're diving deep into the world of Git, one of the most essential tools for modern software development. Git can be a game changer for your development workflow, but to truly harness the power of Git, we're going to need to learn some of the best practices. So in this video, we're going to take everything that we've learned thus far, and we're going to wrap up the Git Beginner series with tips that will help you work more efficiently, collaborate seamlessly, and avoid the common pitfalls. I've compiled a list of best practices that have been tried and tested by developers all over the world. These practices will save you time and make your development process smoother and more enjoyable. In this video, we'll cover efficient ways to set up your project. We'll cover some of the different branching strategies, talk about commands that will be helpful as you continue with your project, and resolve conflicts like a pro. So if you're ready to take your Git skills to the next level and become a more efficient and effective developer, then you're in the right place. All right, no more delays. Let's jump into our first best practice. Ignore files using gitignore. Now, in the majority of projects that you work on, there's going to be times whenever you either work with a framework or have sensitive information that you just do not want to keep track of. And that's where the gitignore really comes in handy, because it allows us to tell Git which files we want to ignore from being tracked. So I've created a sample WordPress project here. And for the time being, you don't have to know anything about WordPress, but what we'll start off is by creating a file. So if I go ahead and click on this icon to create a new file, I'm going to do .gitignore. And everything that we put inside of this file tells Git what files we want to ignore. So if I click on this version control, here are a list of all the files that Git is tracking right now. So I can ignore individual files, and then you'll see that that gets removed as soon as I save it. I can ignore all files that end with PHP. I can ignore all files that start with something. And in case it wasn't clear, this asterisk is a wildcard that means everything. So in this example, I'm saying everything that ends in PHP. And this third example, I'm saying about -everything. And if I wanted to ignore everything, then I could just use the wildcard right here. But obviously we don't want to ignore everything, so I'm going to get rid of that. And if this was ignore files, I'm going to do one that now says ignore directories. And you can create comments inside of the gitignore using the number sign. And so I just created a comment that says, this is where we're going to keep all of our files, and this is where I'm going to keep all my directories. And so you can add directories, and you can see here we have things that are WP admin related. And so let's go ahead and ignore everything that's inside the WP admin folder. I save that, and then you'll see that everything inside of our WP admin got removed, and that now we're down to 1,000 files. You can also ignore files that are inside of other folders. So in this example, we have WP content /plugins, and then if you scroll down, you'll see that we have WP content with themes. And right now, I only want to ignore the plugins. So I'll create a new line, and I'll add WP content /plugins. Now we see that we still have the WP content and everything that is inside of the themes. Now WordPress comes with themes already installed. And if you're wanting to create a custom theme, then these really aren't helpful for you. So we can always just do WP content /plugins /themes. And I'm going to want to ignore everything that starts with 20. Oh, we're not doing it inside plugins. We're doing it inside themes. Now that I'm ignoring all the files that WordPress gives us whenever we download, if I wanted to still track my custom theme, then let me go ahead and comment outline 3. And then if I go to the version control, you'll see that my home is right here. Now you could go one by one and ignore files and directories that you won't really need. And in this case, since we have a framework, you can actually go to github/gitignore, and I'll leave a link in the description. But here you'll see a lot of files that have already been created with very popular framework. And if you keep on scrolling all the way down to WordPress, there's actually one that is already created for WordPress. So if I open this up, you'll see that here's some files that we've included, but let's go ahead and just copy this as a good starting point. And I'm going to paste over my existing file. So if I save that, then you'll see that now we have 37 files, and it looks like what it kept were the plugins. If I look at the comments, then it says, if I wish to whitelist plugins, uncomment the next line. So I actually don't want to keep track of any of my plugins, and there I go. I ignored it. And you still see that home.php file that I created inside of my custom theme. And this is very handy. So whenever you're wanting to ignore a bunch of files that come with the framework, I'm going to temporarily comment out this line. Now I commented this line out because I also want you to see a second reason why you'll want to comment out code. If I go into this WP config sample, then I open up the file and you'll see that this is the file that is used to connect to databases. Now this is definitely a file that you do not want publicly available. Here you'll see that we have information that contains your database name, contains the username, the password, and essentially this is a file that you do not want to be tracked. There's a few ways that I can ignore it. This is an option that will ignore all the files because it starts with WP. So that's one way that you can ignore it. You can also right click on the file and you can add to the gitignore and it gets pushed to the bottom. So I'll delete that. And then the third way that you can also just do it is just by manually typing it in. And there you see that it got removed from the list of changes that are being tracked. And so those are really the main reasons as to why you would want to use a gitignore. But if there are files that you want to ignore, then you can add those files into your gitignore file. Always pull before committing changes. Now, I can't stress this tip enough because if you forget to pull changes before committing code, you run the risk of pushing your changes into the branch whenever other changes already exist. And Git does a good job of letting you know that other changes do exist, but what you do at that moment is you create merge errors. And you can avoid a lot of errors by just pulling code before you push your changes. So I'm working on a separate branch right now where I'm going to change the wording. And let's say the change I want is add 3 exclamation points right there. A track change now. This is a sample test. And actually, I'm going to remove this sample test. And in order to apply these changes, first, let's go ahead and just add this to my stage. And then we're going to switch over to my main branch. And I'm going to want to pull my changes. And the reason I did this, notice that I had changes on my main branch that would have caused merge issues had I not pulled before. I actually had 2 changes right here. So now let's go back to my change wording branch and merge those changes from my main branch to my change wording branch. And now I have the changes applied into my main branch, so I won't have any merging issues. So then from here, I can go ahead and just publish my branch. And then whenever I go to GitHub, I can create my pull request. So just to recap, before you commit your changes to the remote repository, always run the command git pull. Run it on your local branch and run it on whatever branch you want to merge your changes to. Use the Git cheat sheet. I'll have this link inside the description so you can easily reference it. But GitHub has a very nice cheat sheet that you can reference whenever you get stuck. Now, this course has taught you all the basics that you need. You can use Git inside your future projects, but there's going to be some things that you run into where you might not know the answer. So use this resource. If you click on this first link, the Git cheat sheets, you'll have the option for a bunch of different languages. And what we're actually going to want to do is click on this English version. And here you'll have a bunch of commands with a bunch of nice descriptions of what each command does. And if you had questions on certain terms, then these are all the terms that we already covered inside this series. And if you do get stuck in the future, then you can always use this cheat sheet to help you find your answer. If you prefer a PDF version, there is actually a nice PDF that GitHub created. And this PDF is created with the same information and is just nicely laid out for your reference. Tip number 4, think of commits as checkpoints. Okay, let's say that this is a visual of your project's repository, and the arrow line that you see right now is a visual of your master branch, or your main branch, or your default branch, but whatever your main branch is. And this little guy right here, that's basically where you're at right now. Now, this could be version 1 of your website. This could be the beginning of a website. It doesn't really matter, but this is where you're currently at on your main branch. Now, let's say that you wanted to create a new feature. Then you would be right over here. And keep in mind that I said this is where you want to create a new feature. This isn't you actually creating the feature. This is just where you want to do something. Well, at this point, you don't want to develop the new feature on this main branch. So what you want to do is branch off from the main branch. So that's where this step comes in, where you create a new branch. And then whenever you create a new branch, you're basically right here. At this point, let's say that this feature is going to be create a header. So now at this point, you start developing everything that is necessary for creating the new header. And whenever you finish creating everything, you reach the end of your checkpoint. So then you would get to this checkpoint. And now that you've gotten to this point, we're going to package up all of our work into a commit and merge it back into the main branch. And that's your 5th step. Creating branches outside of the main branch is a very effective way to create checkpoints, because if you have a mistake inside your header and this header breaks your entire project, then Git actually allows for you to backtrack. And so it's pretty important that if this merge actually breaks your project, then you can actually put the project back over here to the idea of just a new feature, and it doesn't erase any of your current work. So then you can go back into your 3rd step and make any changes that you need to. Then whenever you're ready,
you can create a new pull request and then you'll end up back at the merge changes. But if you start thinking of commits as checkpoints, then that'll give you a better idea of how to actually name your branches and what kind of descriptions you need inside of your commits. Which leads me to tip number 5, commit often. Now this is a sample repository that I created a while back where I built a REST API using Express. Inside of this repository, you'll see that I have 12 commits. And if we look at those, then I have my initial commit, which just set up the project, and then I created an Express. And as you see, as I'm going through the project, I'm usually doing about 3 commits a day. And there isn't really a rule of saying you must commit 3 times a day or you must commit 10 times a day. I know some people that do get closer to about the 10 times a day, and I know some people that commit only whenever they finish the entire project. And really, this is what works best for you. But one of the advantages in making commits often is you have checkpoints where you can backtrack if you need. And the other advantage is that if you have to reference a certain commit for a future project, you can say, how did I do error handling in Express? Okay, well, if I go into here, then I'm seeing the code that I created that was related to error handling. So there are multiple advantages in making commits often. Create good commit messages. Now, I created this project back in 2020, and what's nice is that I still can reference this whenever I'm creating Express applications because all of my commit messages are very clear. I can always go back to this commit and reference the code to recreate whatever I need. And so in this case, if I needed to reference how to create an Express app, you can see that in the gitignore, I added the ignored node modules folder. I had a file called app.js that had these 10 lines of code and just created something that was just the basics for an Express app. So creating good commit messages allows for you to easily reference code in the future. Creating good commit messages also allow for your team to know what it is that you're trying to achieve. So if I were to go to the pull requests, and let's just take out an older one. So in this pull request, we created a video a while back on the differences between forking and cloning. And so what we had in that example is Billy removed an unnecessary test file. If I were to click on that, then whenever I have the pull request, I know exactly what it is that Billy was trying to do. So if I were to click on the files changed, then I see that test.md is no longer needed. And I know that from 2 ways. One, by looking at the files changed, but it also is very helpful whenever there's a good commit message available.
Tip number 7, use Visual Studio Code for merge conflicts.
So you're not always going to be perfect, and there's going to be times whenever you run into some merging conflicts. And merging conflicts aren't always something that you create, but let's say you ignored my second tip and did not pull before committing changes. In this instance, I already have a change on the remote repository. So if I were to look over here, I say you can see that this language is different. No previous experience required. This is where you begin. But the language here is different. So if I were to actually try to make a change without pulling, and then I were to actually try to commit this, let's just say I push that up, you'll see that there are merge conflicts, resolve them before committing. So using Visual Studio to clear up merge conflicts is incredibly helpful. So if I were to click on the version control, and then you'll see that here I have merge changes, and on the right hand side there's actually a little red exclamation point. If I hover over it at the very far right, you'll see that there's a conflict, both modified. So if I click on that, Visual Studio does a very good job of showing you what the incoming changes are and what the current changes are. You can even see that up here it says theirs and yours. And then at the very bottom, it shows what the final result is. And so if I wanted to accept my current code, then what I could do is I could check this little box over here, and then you'll see that the result right here is showing my changes. But let's say we wanted to accept the change that's already on the remote repository, then I can just click on that checkbox. And you see that the result is whatever I'm checking. Now, if you were to click on both checkboxes, then the final result accepts what both changes are. So then you'll see that I have where I changed no previous experience required was in the row previous one. It overwrote my none. And then you can accept the merge in the bottom right corner of the result. But I'm actually just going to accept whatever the original one is. So I'll go ahead and click the accept merge. And then I can go on to commit any changes after resolving my conflicts to the main branch. Tip number 8. Use GitLog to see your history. So there'll be times whenever you're working on a project and you don't really know when a certain feature got implemented, or you'd like to know how far back a feature that you created was implemented. You could always go to your GitHub repository, and then you could always go to your commits, and this will give you all the information that you need. But instead of having to go to the website, you could just type git log, and then you have that same information right in your terminal. If this is already too much information, then what you could just do is just put git log, put the flag one line. And then you can see a summary of your most recent commits. Tip number 9, use short descriptive messages for branches. Now, I say this hesitantly because I'd rather you be more descriptive than less descriptive, but the important part is that you're descriptive whenever you're creating branches. And what I mean is that often somebody will get a task and then they'll go ahead and open up Visual Studio and go to a new branch and they'll just call it new feature. Well, what does new feature actually say? It doesn't say anything. What feature are you creating? Are you creating this for the front end? Are you creating this for the back end? What is this feature? The reason I say to use good naming conventions is because it becomes very helpful whenever you need to reference this branch. And if we look at the Git Basics repository and click on this button to show more branches, then you'll see that I have more branches that reference each lesson. And so if I were to click on the forking versus cloning, this is the branch that I created for the GitHub forking versus cloning tutorial. It would be very difficult for me to reference this if all of my branches are just tutorial 1, tutorial 2, tutorial 3, and so forth. Now, this is a different Git strategy that continuously adds new versions of the code. And more often than not, these individual branches are trying to get merged into the main branch. And then these all get closed after they get merged. But it's important to have a good naming convention because let's say that you're working on a team of, let's say, 5 people and each person has their individual task. Then whenever you're going into the repository, it's important for you and your team to know what that branch does without having to really go through the entire code. Now, finally, tip number 10, use Git help. You've learned everything that you need to know so you can get started using Git with all of your projects. But we didn't cover everything, and Git creates new features all the time. So if you run into issues and you need help or you need more advanced features, then what you can use is Git help. And by typing help inside of the terminal, then you basically get the entire manual inside your terminal. And so if I scroll up, then I'll see that here are more commands that I can use after Git. Just starting from the very top, then you'll see that I have git v, which is also version. So I can either use git v for the version, or I can use git hyphen for the version. If I were to scroll back up, you can use the hyphen for H, or you can use 2 hyphens for help. And if we were to go down to more git commands that are used in various situations, then this is broken down into different segments. So this is how you can start working on an area. This is how you can work on current changes, how you can examine history. And let's say that I didn't understand what like grep meant. Then what I could do is I could just do the git help, which we saw earlier. There's a shortcut for just -h. I can do git -h and then just do grep. So if I were to press enter, it opens up a page for me that gives me more information on what git grep is. It gives you a synopsis, it gives you a description, it gives you options that you can add on top of that. And at the very bottom, you can see that there are also examples for how to use git grep. So if you really want to become a Git master, then you can really do that using the help. Now, if you don't want to use the terminal, then you can always go online and go to the Git documentation. And that has all of the same options that you'll see inside of your terminal. So if we were to look up grep in here, and then we have git grep, this is the exact same information that pulled up whenever I did the git -h grep. And if you scroll down to the very bottom, you see the same examples from earlier. And these are all the tips that I have for the Git Beginner series. Now keep in mind, we did not cover 100% of Git, but the idea is that you learn what you need to know so you can get your first job as a developer. And I'm confident that everything that we covered inside of this Git series is information that you'll definitely be able to use to get your first job as a developer. So congratulations on finishing the Git series. And as always, keep up the hard work and we'll see you in the next one.